We're back with Right to Life Radio, and joining us in studio, he's back from jet setting all over the United States, Mr. Jonathan Keller from California Family Council. How's it going, Jonathan?
That's me. I just got back from South Carolina where I did a panel on all the craziness coming out of California.
Oh, boy.
Pro-life panel next to Roger Severino, our friend from the Heritage Foundation and formerly of HHS fame.
Okay.
Which is a good transition into our topic.
Yes.
Roger used to work for HHS in the Office of Civil Rights, where he would try to help adjudicate, doctors and nurses who were having their conscience rights violated by big abortion.
And
that department has basically been shut down by the new Secretary of HHS.
Javier Becerra, yes. All right, so let's talk about Javier Becerra today. Earlier this week, the Bee, so McClatchy News, which owns Modesto Bee, Fresno Bee, Sacramento Bee, all the bees.
I do feel like, John, you have to specify that, because if you're talking to a national audience and you say the Bee, people are mostly going to think you mean the Babylon Bee.
Oh, yeah, that's true. That's true, yeah. So McClatchy News, which owns the Fresno Bee, Sacramento Bee, Modesto Bee, and I think actually they own the Miami Herald. So there you go. They did this author, Jillian Brazil, wrote a feature about Javier Becerra and about basically his sort of ties to Obamacare over the course of his career and sort of talking about him. And it would be the understatement of the century to call this a fawning piece, because it's supposed to be like, this is a straight news author. She's a reporter. This is a feature, so it's not a normal sort of news story. A man was killed in a car accident today kind of story.
Yeah.
It's a feature going a little in depth into this person, but you have basically no interviewees for this story who have anything critical to say about Javier Becerra. It's basically the only negative things she can find are comments by people from back in the day. So one negative comment by Rand Paul, a couple of other negative comments. And it's all about Javier Becerra and his fight for equity and his fight for healthcare access. And he's been involved in the fight to protect Obamacare and people's access to healthcare. Blah, 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 blah. How wonderful Javier Becerra is. Now, it starts, I think, to show the tone of this piece, you only need to read sort of the first few paragraphs. Okay. It starts like this. Xavier Becerra, an elementary school teacher, called out in 1960s Sacramento. It wasn't the pronunciation that Javier Becerra, a future U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary, was expecting as a kid growing up in the shadow of California's capital with 3 sisters and parents who spoke Spanish. Was he sitting there thinking, I'm a future Health and Human Services Secretary? This is, how dare this person? More than a half century later, it is how Becerra can usually determine when in his life he met a particular person during his K-12 education or later.
So, John, I just have to interrupt immediately, because this reminds me of the hilarious Key and Peele skit that is on YouTube, very easily findable. Balake. Balake.
Yeah, it's the teacher.
Aaron.
Aaron. Where is Aaron at?
If you've never seen it,
D-nice.
Oh, that's right.
So it's the substitute teacher who's pronouncing all of the students' names wrong and then yelling at them when they try to correct his incorrect pronunciation. Anyway.
It's absolutely hilarious. One of the funniest skits they've ever done.
Now, it keeps going on. The article goes on. He's talking about his application to college. There, he started on a path to make public policy work for people who grew up like he did. Tutoring Spanish-speaking students through a Stanford program in East Palo Alto helped Becerra reflect on who he was and who he could be, he said in an interview earlier this month in his office overlooking the U.S. Capitol. It started by reclaiming his name. I finally said enough is enough, Becerra said. No mas. No more.
No, it doesn't actually say no mas, no more.
It does. He
Are
said
you
no
serious?
He said no mas, and then the author...
I thought you were mocking the article.
No, he says no mas, and then the author of the piece puts in italics after no mas, no more.
Oh,
which is like, all right, people. I know, I am not denying there are people in this country who experience hurtful, wrongful discrimination on the basis of race.
Absolutely.
I am not denying that this happens.
It's wrong. It shouldn't happen.
It's wrong. I really don't think an elementary school teacher, when presented with the name Xavier or Javier, with the name Xavier, I really don't think an elementary school teacher is doing something horribly racist by saying Xavier when the preferred pronunciation is Javier. I knew a kid growing up, his name was spelled Xavier, and we all called him Xavier. It's a name. I don't know. It's one of the two ways you pronounce the name Xavier. This is not some... Anyway, regardless.
Yes.
The whole article makes it out as if the reasons why people on the right don't like Xavier Becerra has something to do with his fearless fight on behalf of healthcare resources for those who are in need. And it talks about all of his stuff, all of his work, basically, as a member of the House, voting for and trying to whip votes for the Affordable Care Act, President Obama's kind of signature piece of legislation, Obamacare. His efforts in 2021 to fight back against an effort to overturn Obamacare, which was defeated at the Supreme Court. Now, this makes it out, just for context, in 2021, the Supreme Court decided a case that was looking at the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act. This is not the 2012 case. Okay, so there are two different cases. 2012 was an extremely contentious, narrow decision by the Supreme Court where John Roberts flip-flopped at the last moment.
5-4.
5-4 to uphold the constitutionality.
It was so controversial, even Anthony Kennedy voted against Obamacare.
Even Anthony Kennedy voted to overturn Obamacare as being unconstitutional.
The man who never met an abortion restriction that he found mildly passable was able to say, no, I want to get rid of Obamacare.
In 2021, there was another Supreme Court case looking at the constitutionality of abortion. But in that case, it was kind of an easy decision. I think it was like 8-1 or something, and the Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of Obamacare again. This was a different set of issues. This was the case where everyone was saying Amy Coney Barrett was a monster, and if you vote to confirm Amy Coney Barrett, she's going to, strip away people's access to healthcare, and then it turned out she 100% did not. Anyway, so they are sort of laying out as if Xavier Becerra has this noble history of fighting for people's right to have health care. And really all he's ever done is, one, vote for and as part of Democrat leadership try to encourage others to vote for the Affordable Care Act. And then as Attorney General in California, he joined with other attorneys general to uphold Obamacare when it was being challenged. That's all he's done. The reason why we on the pro-life side don't like Becerra, the reason why Republicans in the Senate all voted against his confirmation to be Secretary of Health and Human Services back in 2021 when President Biden nominated him, is because he's a hyper aggressive abortion zealot. That's why. Has nothing to do with his race. It has nothing to do even with his advocacy for the Affordable Care Act, or at the very least those provisions of the Affordable Care Act that don't have anything to do with abortion. It purely had to do with his totally extreme views on abortion. So, Jonathan, let's talk about it. Becerra has had in his past some bonkers comments about not only abortion writ large, but also about things like, the First Amendment right of free exercise of religion and how that should relate to people having abortions. He's had insane comments about whether there is any restriction on abortion he would ever support, and he's not able to identify any. He's a total lunatic and zealot for this issue, right?
That is correct.
Yeah.
And there's been multiple cases. I know I was just quickly trying to Google it so that I could actually read a quote, but California Family Council, our organization, did do we've written several articles on Xavier Becerra, including all the way back, not just when he was confirmed as HHS secretary, but going back to when he was elevated by Gavin Newsom from a lowly congressman to be the attorney general of the state of California.
And this was after Kamala Harris got elected to the Senate.
Right.
Then she had been attorney general, so then Newsom made him attorney general.
Yeah. And so if you look at articles that we wrote going all the way back to 2020 and 2021. There was an article that we said from 2020, December of 2020, where we said Vice President Biden has announced his intent to nominate Attorney General Xavier Becerra to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. But I mean, again, on the issues of abortion and on the issues of religious liberty, he specifically said that on religious protections, he was talking about churches. He said, on religious protections, the protection for religion is for the individual. I think it's important to distinguish between protections you're affording to the individual to exercise their religion freely versus protections you're giving to some institution or entity who is essentially bootstrapping the First Amendment protections on behalf of somebody else.
Right. So Xavier Becerra's position, and this is very important as it regards his position as Health and Human Services Secretary. Should churches have an obligation to cover abortifacients in their health insurance plans? Should the First Amendment protect them? Javier Becerra's position is that the First Amendment doesn't protect the free exercise of religion rights of churches, that it only protects individuals, which is a crazy idea. That churches have no, an actual church, an institution set up to be a religion, advance a religion, that does not have any rights under the First Amendment.
That's right.
It's only the individuals. So you can force a church as an employer to provide abortion, to provide abortifacient, which is a wild position for him to take, even among liberals, even among Democrats.
Well, let me give you an example on that, John. Again, I just want to read kind of a portion of how he worded that. He said he tries to break out the religious protection angle, but he says versus protections you're giving to some institution or entity who is essentially bootstrapping the First Amendment protections on behalf of somebody else. Well, the First Amendment, beyond the protections of religion, also includes, I don't know, the rights to peaceably assemble, the rights to speak, the rights to press.
Right.
So I wonder, can we think of any other large institutions that have hundreds of thousands of members that give huge sums of contributions to, I don't know, the state of California politicians that are bootstrapping First Amendment protections, like, I don't know, unions, like the teachers.
The right to freedom of speech also applies to unions and corporations. Yeah, people who gave Xavier Becerra a heck of a lot of money for his various campaigns.
No mention of that. He literally is trying to break out First Amendment protections and say, well, you don't get any rights to the First Amendment religious protections. Now, if you're if you're the Teachers Association, if you're the SEIU, if you're the Nurses Association, you do whatever you want.
Right. So Becerra, now the objection at the time was Becerra has no public health experience other than voting for Obamacare and being a lunatic pro-choicer. That was the argument then. It stands as the argument today. All right, when we return, we'll talk a little bit more about Xavier Becerra and my belief that he's going to run for governor of California. Next on The John Girardi Show. Excuse me, next on Right to Life Radio. Wrong radio show.